Hello, this is Michèle at Jasami Bookworm Podcast. And today I am delighted to introduce our published author, Mattie Turnbull, and she has published The Plain Child. Welcome, Mattie.
Thank you. It's so lovely to be here.
So I know you were in Australia and you were unable to attend the Oxfam Book Festival due to circumstances. So what we're doing, we want to make sure that everybody still has the opportunity to hear your phenomenal story, how the story originated, your history with it. So let's start with the very first question. Where did the essence of this story come from?
Cuba. I was in Cuba a few years ago on holiday. Always wanted to be there, one of those on my bucket list, and went there. And while I was there were a couple of pubs, Scottish pubs with whiskey in them. And so there was this whole absolute wonder. But I did know the history of Cuba and America and Russia, etc. Now, I have a sister, Catherine, and and another sister, and Catherine, was 16 years younger than us. Poor Catherine, she was up to the side. Sister Margaret, Mattie, we were teenagers and we were having fun, honey. And poor Catherine was left alone. The only fun she got was from her father at that particular time. However, she emerged very interesting, and she sold off very slowly the notion that she was rather plain at the time. In our book, the two sisters, the other sisters. And I raised it with her because I didn't want her to feel offended to be called a plain child. She conceded all the way. She said, yes, I was totally plain. And she also went on to talk about how she began to emerge not so plain. One of the reasons was that she was a very good sports person, and had she maintained it, she would have played for Scotland, definitely, in a variety of sports. So that was lovely. She had a best pal who lived next door to us, and I talked to her each time I've been in Glasgow, and I said to her, would you like to be in the book? Yes, she said. Her father, next door to us, was Willie Toner, who played for Scotland, a soccer player for Scotland football.
Yes.
And he passed out a few years before. And his wife, Annette, she was over the moon when I said I wanted to do this. She was a character writ large. She wouldn't come to our mixed marriage because she was a good 24-carat Catholic at that stage, but she used to roam the streets of Glasgow, find the young prostitutes, bring them home to her place after them. So, in that case, but great, great women. So that was essentially why Catherine, the plain child, she had no idea about Cuba, if you know what I mean. She didn't have anything. Mine was an obsession. But nevertheless, off she went and she investigated Cuba. And then she said, well, how did we get there? I had already got the notion of they get there accidentally and it opens the world to them. She and Toner, who lived next door, they're still pals, still great pals, and so on. So that was essentially how it was. I found it really easy because the whole first chapter was all about Glasgow. And Glasgow is one of the funniest places in my experience, and I have travelled and lived in various places. And every so often one comes up. And one the other day was, there she goes, bare heels and pointed toes. Look at her feet, she thinks she's neat, like stockings and dirty feet. So it wasn't difficult for me. The big differential between the Presbyterians and the Catholics, the big divide in Glasgow. It was very real when I was wee. And my husband, Jack, was a Presbyterian. And I met a Presbyterian recently of my vintage. And cut a long story short, I said, what's it like being a Presbyterian in, I think it was 2019, whatever. And he said, nothing's changed. Anything's all right as long as you don't enjoy it. So it went on and on. And then he said to me, but you're going to be Catholic, what about you? I said, well, we grabbed the first notions of bingo, made a fortune for the church. In the meantime, you were all dismissing happiness or jokes or whatever. But both were extreme. But I did want to represent Glasgow and its humour and its change and its development. Probably the most left one, I don't mean left wing, I mean the left condition, is the Celtic Rangers. That doesn't seem to pass. But it's much milder now. I know when I go back, we're there every other year. So if you lived in Glasgow, you probably wouldn't notice, but we notice when we get there. And I didn't want to leave Glasgow out of anything for the two young women. And they also grabbed the opportunity to go to Eastern Europe at a particular period in history when they were offering, a bit like in Australia, we offered, come on down and work in the fields. We'll give you a contract for 3 months. Or so Catherine, or Mary in the book, Mary and Angela, both went to a couple of places in Eastern Europe and they earned a few dollars. And that was what gave them the notion of travel, particularly to America when the market's that size, and to open a little business. They were so daring. It was incredible. Because they were just two wee punters from the east end of Glasgow. But this European experience gave them the confidence and the attribute. Yeah, that would be the right word. And so they were going to go, and they went to Florida because they thought that was a good idea. But they didn't like so much Miami. Then they decided to move over to the west coast of Florida. And that was when it all began. They get on the wrong aircraft, and it's an American Air Force on its way to Cuba. They figure it out, and the Americans make big deals with them. Shut up. Please don't say anything. We'll pay for you, which they did. And that's how they had that adventure in Cuba. But the rest, of course, is reliant on the fact that they meet Cuban guys who are, in that particular period in history, was also the whole of Africa was being challenged to be communist. And the guy that the plain child marries, he has to do what he's told. And there's every possibility that they would go to Africa, and they did, to Angola on the west coast. And that's, Catherine didn't particularly want to be there, but I do want to say one of the funniest things that happened, she marries him, and I see Catherine historically, this is on the phone, she's in Portugal. I said, well, what's going to happen is you're going to end up in a communist country. That's what's going to happen, because that was at the time. And I said, so have a think, when you think about you and the character, where are you going to go? It's like this, and we're having a conversation. And then I said, have a think about it and let me know what you think. Where would you like to go in the book? And she called me back within 20 minutes. She says, Mattie, I just wanted to talk to you about where, communist country, where we might have ended up. She said, I just want to say to you, I'm not going to fucking North Korea. So that was the end of that one.
All right.
So
word alert.
It's all in the book. Thank you.
I think, Mattie, that the most important part of the story is I've introduced you from Australia, but obviously your accent is not Australian. Please tell
No.
where you were born and how you ended up in Australia, because that's an adventure in itself.
Oh, okay. East end of Glasgow, Sandy Hills Council, whatever you want to call it. And there's nothing wrong with it. 4 block house, and we were on that side, and we had a little garden. It was good. I grew up, leave school at 15 because can't go to uni because can't afford, they couldn't afford it. And I got loads of job offers, but not before. I had been rejected lots of times by somebody in the chair, and the final conclusion to the interview for the job was, so what school did you go to? And I had gone to the Catholic Senior Secondary, Our Lady in St Francis, and it was nearly in the city centre in Glasgow. And as soon as I said Our Lady in St Francis, the person who was interviewing me said next, and that was the end. And that happened to me a lot, which was really unfortunate. However, eventually I got loads of jobs, and I then joined, British Rail, where I met my husband. But I'd met him and we went out and so on. But I had my best pal and another kind of best pal. The three of us decided at that stage, 1963, that we could easily, the Canadians were calling for migrants. So off we went, and we spent 2 years there. Back to Glasgow, and Jack's around and I'm around, and we end up together. Now, we were both very adventurous at that stage. And the first place we left to go to was south of England. Went to Essex, Romford and Essex. If I say that to somebody from the south of England, they go, well, why would you go to Essex? It was Margaret Thatcher time. Essex, Essex, all that jazz. Then we come back to Glasgow. And we buy a house, and we're very comfortable when I'm working full time, and the children are coming along. There's only 2 years between 3 children. And then Jack, being an accountant, he got something in the mail to say, come to sunny South Africa. 1975, beginning of the end of apartheid. We grab it. We don't sell the house in Glasgow, we rent it, and off we go. Oh, wonderful time. We had a great time, as well as a very changing time, because apartheid was crazy. So we stayed there for 5 years, and then we decided it's time to move on. And we applied to go to Canada, and we do. We're there for 5 years. Then we decided it's too cold in Canada, too cold for too long, not necessarily too cold if it was only for one season every year, but it was more cold than it ever was warm. So we applied to come to Australia. Go through the whole what's it. We've got 3 children at that stage, and they are 16, 14, and 12. We don't consult them.
Yes, because you guys, you're in charge in the family. Yes.
Every time I think about it, we're very close to them. We talk about it, and every so often they raise it. Anyway, we were quite sure that Australia would suit us, particularly Western Australia, because it was on the rise. Small population, plenty of opportunity, and so on. And there was, but I mean, it's been around. And that was really the history we enjoyed. Every time we went somewhere else, we got work, jobs. It was very easy. Came here to Western Australia, checked in, got a house to rent. Don't ask me how we managed that, but we did. And we moved into the house. I had a job within 48 hours.
Oh, that's how you are.
He was a wee bit longer, but it doesn't matter. I'm just saying, so what you're supposed to do, you get, it was welcome, come on in, here's a job. It's almost as simple as that. Climate here in Western Australia is perfect for me today. Second day in spring, 25 degrees. Talking to my sister, and she said, no, it was a friend we were supposed to visit when we were going to be there. And she said, Mattie, you're going to laugh at this. She said, but we're really excited. It's 23 today. First day of spring, and it was 24, 25 today. So it kind of suits us, but we live near the Indian Ocean. We live in the city of Fremantle, which is so totally eccentric. It's so value system is very leftish. They've never had a liberal, whatever you want to call it, call it here. They've never had one. That's not true. We did have one about 5 years ago, but they just died on the spot. So there's that. There's there's restaurants everywhere, and good pals. We live in a street which is multicultural. Next door to us are Irish at the front, and etc. So it's a very good place to be, and the more people who come to Fremantle, the more they fall in love with it. And of course, it's right on the ocean. And if you stand on the sand and you look over there, Africa. So
it's a beautiful place.
It's a good democracy.
So beautiful place to live. And how does I know the question's going to come up about the writing. Where do you write? Do you write at the ocean? Do you write inside the house, out in the back garden? What inspires you? Where do you feel most creative, Mattie?
Outside on the back garden, on the table.
When you're sitting out on the back and the garden, and you've got that beauty so close to you, and so did the writing flow easily for you? Because it is a novella, and it's told like you're sitting by the fireside or even on the beach and telling friends of the story. How did that come about, the actual writing process for you?
Well, I didn't actually show off or tell anybody I was writing a book. I just kept it myself, really, because I've been teaching all this time as well. And the youth of today helped me along the way as well, because I'm so fond and I just can't get enough of them, like Sophie, who's helping today. And I think, well, I've started the next book.
Oh, excellent. And wonderful.
My best friend, Janet, and you're going to enjoy everything so much. And she is thrilled to bits. Very same age as me. We have shared so many things here. I met her in 1984. I worked for Princess Margaret Hospital for the CEO, if you don't mind. And she was in charge of wages. And in 1984, here, we still paid in cash. How about that?
That's great.
We'd come from Canada, and it wasn't like that at all. But also, I do enjoy Australia because it's a good democracy.
So
it really,
with the writing process, and because of where you know it is, so when you sit down to write something, how does it start for you? How do you start that first sentence that leads to that story?
Well, for example, the Janet one that I'm thinking about, I've already thought about it before. I consulted her 2 days ago, and it was wonderful because she said, Mattie, it's going to be a big introduction. I said, yes, because I have to explain she's from Somerset and completely different. My life has been very straight, hers has been but we laugh together. And that is a very important thing for me. Sister Catherine, when I'm writing The Plain Child, she couldn't have been more enthusiastic. It was really wonderful. And my friend Janet, if I'm going to do it, she's excited as well. But doesn't that make you feel, go, go, go? And then I'll give you a quick example. Janet said it's all about Janet's stories. They're true, what happened to her. And then she said, don't forget, Mattie, in the introduction in 1984, she said, I asked you to do a a charity thing because a big fundraiser. Cliff Richard was here.
Oh, great.
And both of us. So that's easy because I hadn't forgotten at that stage. I hadn't thought about it. And as soon as I come home that night, I put it down roughly. And I did that with Catherine as well. All those things that happened in Glasgow. And she was from 1958. So many things bloody happened then. And that made it not difficult because she was in it and so was her best pal. And they suffered from loads of things at camp, not in 58, but as it moved on, the fog thing, Clean Air Act, all that kind of stuff. So it wasn't that difficult, actually, Michèle, to find
The parts and
stuff like
pieces.
that.
So from
Aye,
what I understand, I would say that you think of the story and then the words just flow.
very much so. Very much so. Very lucky. Very
And
lucky.
that's an
Sorry.
inspiration. That's definitely an inspiration to other writers, that it is very
Oh,
important. I was speaking to one of our other authors, and they actually said the same thing. They're starting a new book, and they thought about it for several hours. Then when they sat down, the words were flowed easily. So that's what you're saying, is that when you
oh,
think
very much
about it
so. Very.
and create it, the words flow easily. That's wonderful.
And I also think that I really am. I love my sister, and I love my pal. So there's going to be a flow of comedy, say, but there is nothing detrimental or anything. It doesn't exist. So therefore, it was going to be a positive story because it was a problem. I didn't have to make it up. I had to make up stuff about she marries the the Cuban. What was he? He was a very high rank, but I knew that wasn't gonna. It was too straight for the plain child at that stage. She was full of adventure, and he was straight as anything. We were going to Angola, and that's that. And then I definitely could imagine her looking at some relationship that control stuff, and she wouldn't have stayed, if you know what I mean. So I didn't want to make big negativity about the poor guy because he was only following in his father's footsteps and what was happening in Cuba at that time. The
So,
other issue is that, oh, sorry.
no, please go ahead and then I'll ask my question.
Oh, okay. Cuba has got such an amazing history. It's so beautiful. It was everything. And I had all this pleasure because they ended up in Cuba. And it wasn't difficult for me to remember because it was only the year before or whatever. And we went round that whole island. So history was right in your face. American thing and lots of big Jewish population in Cuba, which I didn't know. And then in the travels, we found out why. It doesn't matter, but it was because, of course, the Jewish population at that time owned lots. And when they were trying to get their independence, what they're going to do, they didn't have enough money to pay them off and so on. So it was really off to the side thing, which I chose not to bother about because that wasn't what the book was about. It wasn't about the political system in Cuba or anywhere else. Of course, it had to be mentioned, but that wasn't part of the deal, if you know what I mean.
So other
And I,
from what I can
sorry,
gather,
go.
those 2 points are that the character is very strong in your mind, so that when you were writing the story, you knew the character would not do a certain action. So that character was alive, which is really important. And then, of course,
Yeah.
you're very knowledgeable and well read about history, and that's part of part that I enjoyed quite a bit in the story is
Oh, okay.
there that not even I knew. So about Glasgow and certain things. And of course, with my family coming from here, I know quite a bit. So you've displayed the characteristics of the writer that's so important. And it's not your first book. You had done another book before this, which we'll give a quick advertisement for. What was your first
Oh,
book?
it was about the evacuation of Scottish children, World War II, because I got fed up with the assumptions all over the place that every story was the same. Scotland was quite different in its treatment of evacuees, and it was so. Oh, whereas against the non-Scottish, I can't say English because it was somewhere elsewhere, but I so enjoyed. I interviewed so many people about their experience,
And
and the
what's
one classic.
sorry,
Sorry,
what's
go
the
on.
name of that book? What's the name of that book, Mattie, before we forget?
It is the just a story. Sophie, could you get it, please? It's on the wee table at the door. Yeah. When you're ready. Thanks very much. I'll give you it in a minute. But I do have to tell you a very quick anecdote. I'm in Glasgow. I'm interviewing two brothers. Okay. Oh, all right. Two brothers. They had been evacuated to Aberdeenshire from Scotland on a farm. So they have to get used to it. It's completely different. The big, most important thing, or the most important difference, is that the mothers in Scotland went with the children. Whereas in the other parts of the world, when the things that happened, the abuse, all that jazz. But very funny. Two men sitting in front of me had that experience and nudging each other. One was older than the other, of course. And my final question was at that time, so was your experience, what could you say about your experience? Was it positive? Was it, at Glasgow, typical Glasgow? And they nudge each other. And the older one said, all right, I'll tell it. And then he said, well, the best thing we had was the fact that we had a teenage boy there on the farm, and we were only like 12 and 14. He said, best thing that happened to us, he taught us how to smoke fags. Yeah, that was it. I just had to do it. But that was more of like a PhD thing. But in the change, I decided not to do that. And I got, anyway, got it published. And there was a pretty good conclusion. It was much more according to, it was references of 4 pages, whereas I didn't need any pages, only imagination really in the plain child.
And
Oh, sorry, right.
you've expressed two, for nonfiction and fiction, which the transition between the two is quite different. But
Oh,
telling
God,
the
yeah.
story that you've done, but you've still included quite a lot of history in there. And this is all the parts that inspires, the writers, and new writers that
Mm-hmm.
research is important, but still you in your novella, even though there's actual facts and but from your story, it's entertaining. And that's the difference with nonfiction. So we'll be wrapping this up. I just have one more
Sure,
question for you.
of
Uh,
course.
with the next book, I understand it's going to be slightly different, because obviously it's a different character that's in it. Are you going to bring other characters in as well that are as entertaining as the first book?
Yes, because my friend Janet, the story is about her. It's going to be called essentially Janet's stories, something like that. And other people, her stories are so amazing that I have been a good few people who say, I don't believe that. So she's up against that. But so many of the things that did happen to her, I was there. So I'm not going to make it up at that time. I might make it up now, I might embellish it. But at that particular time, it was everything happened. I was there. One of them, very quickly, is that she's walking along Main Street of quite a big suburb. A guy comes up and punches her. Instead of kicking him in the balls, in my opinion, he walks on, turns a corner, and she follows him and says, "Why did you do that to me? Why did you punch me like that?" And it was the era of Margaret Thatcher. And good. Oh, thanks very much. Anyway, the guy says to her, she said, "Well, why did you hit me? Why did you do that?" He says, "Because you look like fucking Margaret Thatcher, that's why."
Oh,
and she
gosh.
does. And fast forward, we're sitting at my table not that long ago. I'm here, Janet said, we're both staring at each other. And she eventually said, "Mattie, why are you staring at me?" I said, "You're a beautiful woman, and I still think, to be honest, you do look like Margaret Thatcher, but Margaret, on the basis that Margaret Thatcher is a very pretty person," and so on. So she sighed, and then I said, "But Janet, you were still, punching me in as well." I said, "Why were you doing that?" It's because you look like fucking Camilla, that's why.
Oh, gosh. So we're making friends and influencing people all over, considering your position. Now we'll just kind of maybe edit that. And the book was called Days of Apprehension and Adventure, Experiences of Scottish Child Evacuees During World War II by Mattie Turnbull. Excellent.
Okay.
We're
good, you've got it.
advertise The Plain Child, you'll the novella, and you've got another book coming out soon. So as we end the podcast, I'm going to put you on the spot, and I always ask for a shout out to someone. Who would you love to give a shout out to and acknowledge in this particular moment?
I'm not sure what you mean.
A shout out is acknowledging someone, that you're thinking about that may have helped with the book, or it might be a group of people. I usually do a shout out if it's, so I'll do my shout out first. In this particular instance, my shout out would be to the strong women of Glasgow who lived through what they've done, and such as you are, and the stories that you create from it. So I've done general.
Okay.
So who do you have a shout out to?
Probably the vice chancellor at the university. That person. I want to get into the library because I teach in the area of social sciences, right? And we have a woman, and I will be looking for an interview. We'll be chasing her to say, "What do you think?" And I think what will happen, she won't. I mean, it's a university, everybody's writing books. I think what she might do, might say, "Mattie, give me a few copies, we'll put them in the library." And I think that's what will happen. And I'd be very happy with that. Because the unit that I teach is very heavily on the history of politics in Australia. It's not political systems, it's about the tiers of government. And there's so much humour in the process. Australia is I think the reason that Jack and I have settled here is because they don't take anything too seriously. And that's Glasgow. Don't take it too seriously. If you take yourself too seriously, you bend.
And that is a perfect positive way to end this, is that it's the positivity of Australia and Scotland. And I want to thank you so much for sharing everything today, Mattie. And I'll just have to end it with thank you for your time.
Oh, my pleasure. Okay.
Once again, that was recorded over Zoom, as Mattie is located in Australia and was unable to travel to the Oxfam Book Festival that's going on very shortly. So thank you, Mattie, for participating. And as always, this is Michèle at Jasami Bookworm Podcast, wishing you all a sunny day.